This is the Cycle World podcast. Welcome back, regular listeners. Welcome, new listeners. Today's topic with Kevin Cameron, our technical editor, and me, Mark Hoyer, editor-in-chief, is fuels. How we move, energy storage, really. How do we store energy and stick it on our motorcycle and ride around? So we're going to talk about energy as it relates to motorcycles. Of course, we can't help but talk about more global things such as aviation and automobiles and shipping and everything else we use to move things and get around. You know, I'd like to start with steam power. Why don't we have steam powered motorcycles?
Well,
get some coal.
It was shown that flash steam generators could make steam in a fine coil with a strong flame playing through it very promptly. So at the end of the steam car business in the 1930s, there were still a few hang-ons. They were able to raise steam very quickly. So it wasn't that old process of give me some paper, will you? Got any little twigs?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and of course, old Lear of Learjet, claimed that he was going to build a steam automobile that would challenge the internal combustion paradigm, but it didn't come to pass. So it could happen. It could have been made to happen, but it turned out that sort of World War I sorted this all out. What do we have that we can use in this pointless war? Gasoline engines. We've got gasoline, we've got engines. And they put gasoline engines into airplanes and trucks. And they put internal combustion engines, diesels, into submarines. They tried steam submarines, believe it or not, and they tried gasoline-powered submarines, but the fumes overcame the crew. So it was a big shakeout. And if World War I hadn't taken place, it's quite possible that steam would have carried on and received more R&D. But it didn't. So here we are with the spark ignition gasoline-fired internal combustion engine. The great thing about it, compared with, say, a gas turbine's efficiency depends upon how the percentage of maximum power that it's producing, because it's a dynamic machine. Its compression ratio, as you might say, depends on how much power it's making. So, for example, the specific thrust fuel consumption on takeoff is lower than in cruise, because on takeoff, the engine is running at its maximum. And Chrysler built their turbine car, and they put a few in private hands for a kind of beta test, and then it just faded away. Rover in England did also put gas turbine in a Rover car and drove it around for a while, but I think they probably both looked at this and said, big money R&D stands between us and a useful product. Because in the case of the gas turbine, it's most efficient when it's running at maximum. Whereas the internal combustion engine, piston internal combustion engine, has the same compression ratio whether you're on full throttle or idle. And so it is ideally suited to vehicles that must perform over a range of speeds from 0 to whatever the state says it should be at the moment.
What are the qualities of gasoline that make it win so far?
Well, the great thing about gasoline is, first of all, there was plenty of it, because those oil wells that were drilled not very far into Pennsylvania, their main product that they could sell was lamp oil, kerosene. And the gasoline was dangerous because it evaporated and produced an ignitable mixture with air. Well, producing a prompt ignitable mixture with air is exactly what the internal combustion engine needs. You could imagine an internal combustion engine operating on wood, but it would be pretty gradual. But with gasoline, you could the first carburetors were evaporator carburetors, basically a gasoline soaked rag with air on its way into the engine passing over this rag. It was made to work. And then the spray carburetor, invented by Maybach in Europe and by Hedstrom in the US, who was later chief engineer of Indian. The spray carburetor, gasoline's ability to evaporate rapidly was of essential importance to the internal combustion engine, because try to start a spark ignition engine on diesel and you'll see why.
Yeah, or kerosene.
Doesn't want to.
That
in
was
the
the story.
1930s, yeah.
Yeah, there was the story. You're probably telling it right now about guys in their tractors.
Oh, yeah, in the 1930s when nobody had any money. Start the engine on gasoline, which cost more. As soon as it was warm enough, switch to kerosene, which was cheaper, and made a terrible smell and probably didn't run terribly well, but good. So initially, the definition of gasoline was whatever boils off from petroleum between two temperatures, a lower and a higher temperature. And for that reason, gasoline is not a pure substance, like, for example, ethyl alcohol. All the ethyl alcohol molecules are identical. But in gasoline, you have light molecules with 3 or 4 carbons and hydrogens attached to them, all the way up to 9 carbons with hydrogens attached to them. And that range of boiling points worked out to be able to cold start internal combustion engines with spark ignition. And because part of that fraction of distillation, it was extremely volatile. The way you started a car when it was cold was you enriched the mixture so much that the total amount of highly volatile stuff that evaporated was enough to make a mixture in the range of 10 parts of air to 1 of fuel, which is the rich limit, to 18 parts of air to 1 of fuel, which is the lean limit. And that's why if you've ever driven a choke-equipped car or motorcycle in cold weather, as soon as the engine starts, you have to kind of start easing off the choke, because as the engine warms up, it evaporates more of the fuel.
Just bringing them along.
Yep. And so if you're in a big hurry and you drive off, you've got partial choke on, but you have to remember to keep nudging it toward the normal mixture. And by the time you're a couple minutes down the road, you're able to have throttle response and drive normally, because the engine has become hot enough to evaporate all of those kinds of molecules, the light, volatile ones and the heavier, more sluggish ones that remain on your fingers like, is this gasoline or is it diesel?
Yeah, it's one of the reasons in a water-cooled automobile that they would run coolant through the intake manifolds.
Absolutely.
Inline 6, run water through the intake manifold, get it up to temperature quickly, because the coolant's circulating only inside the engine until the thermostat opens, and then away you go. So we have gasoline, which is obviously our dominant fuel. We've burned all kinds of things. We've burned wood, coal. We get gas out of the ground, natural gas, propane. We can burn alcohol made from many different things, including corn.
Yep.
What am I missing?
40%. About 40% of the U.S. corn crop is made into fuel alcohol by fermentation.
Diesel. kerosene, many different things that we can burn. And so we've kind of talked some of the basics about gasoline. Let's talk about diesel. What's good about diesel, and then maybe some reasons we don't have it in motorcycles, starting with the smell, maybe. But
Well, there was that story that I think Mr. Honda told on himself. He said when he was a boy and the first car came down the road through his little rural town, he'd never seen anything like that. A thing that could move without legs and animals and so forth attached to it. And the smell, he said, the smell was so exotic that I ran after it for as long as I could keep up. And my dad had a cousin who loved the smell of gasoline and would stand there sniffing at it until he fell over. So yeah, I think you don't hear these romantic stories about that diesel, nothing like it.
Yeah.
But the early pioneers of internal combustion were competent theoreticians. They knew quite a lot about heat cycles. And the thing about the diesel engine that we know that it's called, the engineers call it compression ignition. And the idea being that if you have a high enough compression ratio, the air is so heated by compression that it is hot enough when a spray of diesel fuel is injected into it at pressures up to 30,000 psi, which is like the maximum pressure in a handgun.
Sounds expensive to replace.
Well, it's had a lot of development. The fuel auto ignites. It burns without a spark. Diesels do not have air throttles. They take in all the air they can, and the load is adjusted by varying the amount of fuel that is injected. In the old days, there was a tiny piston pump for each cylinder that was a variable stroke. And today it's common rail. There's a high pressure fuel rail serving all the injectors, and they are lifted either by electromagnetic solenoid means or by piezoelectric valve.
Well,
so,
not having a throttle would be the first step in having a little bit better efficiency than a gasoline engine.
Yes, because the higher the temperature of the combustion gas, the more energy is lost in movements of molecules that don't push on pistons. Molecules zooming here and there, like a high-speed photography of busy bus station, that produces pressure on the piston. But if the molecules themselves are vibrating, or if they're rotating, that energy doesn't push on pistons. That energy goes out the smokestack with the exhaust gas. So in order to limit that loss, reducing the temperature of combustion is important. And that's why there are all these ways of limiting the production of nitrogen oxides by recirculating combustion gas in diesels.
Yeah, autos did it for a long time. I think it's less prominent now, but it's actually fairly clever. EGR doesn't usually function when you're matting it on your gasoline engine. You want full chat. You want all the power. They don't put inert gas back into the cylinder to effectively.
Well, anything they're going to do anything that doesn't appear on the emissions test, and they go over it carefully. And so if sharp momentary accelerations and so forth are not tested, then they're going to go to a maximum power mixture during that time and the emissions be damned, so to speak. But the emissions test has to be something that can be completed in less than infinite time. So there has to be a compromise of some sort. But
Well,
the basic, let's compare the efficiencies of a gasoline engine and a diesel compression ignition engine. It's quite typical for a gasoline engine to need to burn 1/2 a pound of fuel per horsepower per hour. So that's 0.5. This is called brake specific fuel consumption. For a diesel, it's more like 0.35 pound per horsepower per hour. So that's the big attraction for heavy trucking, because those things consume a lot of fuel. It's a large part of the price that they have to charge the person who's shipping with them. So they want to be able to use as little fuel as possible so that their prices will be competitive. In World War II, well, even before World War II, there was some fear at first that the gasoline spark ignition engine had no future because it was limited by detonation. And diesel was not. So the Germans built some diesel aircraft engines. And it's always been a puzzle to me why German tanks were not diesel, but
sure.
Russian tanks were diesel.
There was a Stinson called the Detroiter that had a diesel engine on it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. There was a diesel radial,
1930s,
I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. So also international shipping, ocean shipping, is universally propelled by very large direct drive two-stroke diesels. And those things run at over 50% fuel efficiency, so that more than half of the energy in the fuel is turning the propeller. And or is being used to generate the electric power for the ship. And it's kind of like a Formula One engine was there for a while, with all the energy going to some useful purpose somewhere. But it was pointed out to me by someone with considerable diesel experience that a single cylinder diesel, because of its high compression ratio, needs such a flywheel that it wouldn't be much fun to start or to ride, because the throttle response would be something like tuck, 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 tuck.
Sounds like a traction engine on the farm there, turning your water pump or something. The hit and miss was.
So a diesel engine on a motorcycle, to my mind, would be a desperation deal. I've got a motorcycle rolling chassis. I have a diesel engine from some small power unit, and I need to get around for the smallest price. This is the Armageddon catastrophe vehicle.
Yeah. Well, they got pull start diesels that you can buy from various outlets around the world, and I've seen people build those up. We had the KLR.
Oh, sure.
The KLR 650 chassis that was made for the military, the U.S. military, that had a diesel engine in it. We tested one of those years ago. I imagine if you had a touring bike, imagine, your Harley Davidson or your Honda Goldwing with a nice turbo diesel in it, well insulated. It wouldn't be bad,
Could be done, sure.
Wouldn't be as dynamic, certainly, and that's the thing. That's kind of what we came for in motorcycling in America, is the dynamics.
Motorcycles go, so far at least, they go back and forth between being a utility. Motorcycle registrations actually exceeded car registrations in England in the 1920s, because people didn't have a lot of money for such things as motor vehicles. And a motorcycle gave you a whiff of motoring at a much lower price. And the other alternative is you want the motorcycle for the hell of it. And that's why the rough Superior S100 is regarded with such reverence because it's this big, long-legged thing that could just carry you along country roads effortlessly, and you could reach any speed permitted by the circumstances.
A lot of nice shapes there. A lot of nice shapes. And
yeah.
I
So,
think, well,
same thing happened here.
you're talking about 1920s, 30s,
Yep.
40s, England, a lot of motorcycles, sidecars with roofs on them. And, I'm going to do it, folks. I'm going to mention my Veloset. Sorry. But I ride that bike, and I've ridden it quite a bit. And I try to think about somebody going to the docks for work, getting up in the morning and relying on a 54 Veloset or a 37 or whatever to get to the docks to their job. And I think, wow, you're climbing mountains just to get to the office. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
yeah,
really something.
When the war ended, World War II, in 1945, the quickest transportation that could be got into production was motorcycles. So Germany had a huge explosion of motorcycle production, and so did Japan. I don't think the streetcars were running initially. I think there was a lot of trouble getting from where you could live to where you could work. And as soon as cars got into production in Germany and Italy and in Britain, motorcycles became not so desirable. And so they had to shift their role. England produced sporting motorcycles for the US market, for Argentina. And once the Japanese market was saturated, Mr. Honda saw that America had only Harley Davidson and a small number of adventuresome young men and police riding motorcycles. And he thought, those Americans will enjoy having a little fun on little motorbikes that we'll build for them. And so it turned out that you met the nicest people on a Honda or whatever your choice was. But this is what has happened with motorcycles. They've gone back and forth between utility, cheapest form of motorized transportation, and riding for pleasure, excitement, passion, etc. And as Mr. Honda said in the owner's manual of the 1959 Bentley twin, primarily essentials of the motorcycle consist of the speed and thrill.
Indeed. Well, that's the cool thing about, even like a Trail 125. We have a Trail 125, and they recently, last model year, they kicked the power up slightly, and it's still not fast, for a guy like my size, 6'2", and 220-ish pounds, add a helmet, add a backpack. I can go 57 on relatively flat ground, but it's actually really fun to ride, and you could have very high utility and very high fuel efficiency, somewhere in the order of 120 to 135 miles per gallon without too much trouble.
Yep.
And pretty vigorous acceleration and good times. And so for me, that's always been the charm of motorcycle. Well, it's one of the charms of motorcycling is you can have such efficiency if you seek it, and you still get a huge part of the thrill. Engaging your balance is a huge part of the thrill. Like, that's so fundamental for me. If I don't ride for some period of time, I go on vacation to Europe or something, and I'm away from riding for 2 weeks or a week. I come back, you almost don't notice it, but you get back on a motorcycle, and as soon as I pick up my feet and the clutch hits and I engage my balance, I feel a new feeling, a renewed feeling of calm and centeredness. And you get that on a Trail 125 or a 401 Husky or a 900 SS to some degree, maybe a little higher. No, it's really remarkable. So diesel, very efficient. Obvious, there's difficulties controlling soot and other things with diesel that are a little bit more vicious than in a gasoline engine. there was during the fuel crises, if you'd missed some of those, where you could only get gas on certain days if you had an even numbered license plate or an odd number license plate, you could only go on Tuesdays or whatever to fill your car or motorcycle up. There were a lot of propane powered cars because propane was laying around and you could put an adapter. My generator at home runs on propane because it will not clog the carburetor from sitting. So I've never put gasoline in my big 6.6 gallon generator tank. It's always propane because I know I don't have to clean the carburetor. But propane, not a bad fuel, but I think gases, compressible gases is actually something we should talk about because we have, one of an seemingly infinite number of potential futures, and one of those is hydrogen. But I like to start with something before, something less.
Like liquid nitrogen, liquefied natural gas.
Yeah.
LNG. That's the way natural gas is shipped overseas. You see these ships that have these huge spheres projecting up through the deck. That stuff has to be kept quite cold or it gases off unacceptably. And it doesn't work as a motor fuel unless you can refrigerate it and handle the pressure that results when it evaporates. So the reason those ships are going to Europe is the pipelines under the sea bringing Russian gas to Germany and so forth are no longer intact. So it changes the financial relationship somewhat. But propane is easily produced from various refinery feedstocks, and propane doesn't produce tremendous pressures and it can stay a liquid without being refrigerated. So it's a natural for things like powering your standby generator, or if you want to run a fleet of trucks with a central base on a gaseous fuel, that's a candidate. Natural gas is mostly methane with some other things like carbon monoxide or hydrogen in it. And methane has the most hydrogen in relation to carbon of any of our fuels short of hydrogen itself. There's one carbon bonded to 4 hydrogens. So it's CH4 is the chemical name for it. And it is also a feedstock from which so many things can be generated. And for a period of time, people were acting as though there were going to be battery-operated airplanes for long haul. Now, they are doing a lot of experimenting with short-haul electric aircraft because there's no ground-level emissions during takeoff and landing, which makes them attractive for, I have to get from downtown New York out to the big airports. And if the big airports are a little farther along, you could build a hybrid turbo-electric airplane in which it takes off on battery power, so there's no emissions at the point of departure. The gas turbine starts, you cruise on the gas turbine, and any excess power that it's producing is charging the battery meanwhile. And then when you land, the turbine is shut down and you land on electric power. Again, no emissions at the point of arrival. So there's a lot of stuff going on. Oh, air taxis are another one. Pilotless air taxis. Do you think that will attract hackers?
Yeah, it is attractive when you consider the complication and expense of firing up a helicopter and using something that's essentially, a giant drone that you hang people in.
Yeah.
It's electric. It's, the complication, like there's an electric aircraft maker, Pipistrel, that does small trainers that are electric powered. perfect application because you're basically taking off, flying in the pattern, landing, touch and goes. You're not trying to get to, New York to Miami or something, you're just rattling around, and you don't kind of have to mess with all that, but you can't get too far. I mean, I think it's the 777 has 300,000 pounds of jet A in it for takeoff.
For a maximum travel distance. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I guess so, we have to talk about electrics because there's certainly, I thought I was trapped in some kind of weird glitch in the matrix the other day. I mean, in Southern California, the proliferation of Teslas is pretty amazing.
Yeah.
And I was in a situation where I had 5 white Teslas in a parking lot, all doing different things. And I'm in an 89 Ford F-250 with a 460, which is kind of the anti-Tesla, sitting there looking around at all of this and thinking, where are we? So it's easy to package electric in a car because, most people are not noticing that it may weigh 9,000 pounds. Like the Rivian R1S performance thing is somewhere like around 8,000 pounds. There's the Hummer EV, which is a 10,000 pound electric brick. Lots going on there. The electric motorcycle, they're great to ride. They're really fun to ride. You get a Zero, you get a Live Wire, various other brands. Those are the 2 folks who've sort of tried to make the most out of making a business of it. And they're really fun to ride. The problem with a full-size motorcycle shaped electric is that in the mind of the current motorcyclist, it's writing a check in your mind that the machine can't cash, because if you get on it and you rip on it like a motorcycle, you're really pretty limited in range. You'd be lucky to get 100 miles out of the current battery capacity that we can fit on a motorcycle without making a motorcycle 800 pounds. And that's the problem, is packaging. That's the energy density thing. And I think maybe, you have such a good handle on the relative weights and storage capacities, and gasoline has this many kilowatt hours, and I can put it in. A gas pump is usually 8 gallons per minute, meaning you pull up on your MT-07 with a 3.8 or 4 gallon tank, and in 40 seconds, you've put 135,000 kilowatt hours into your tank.
Tremendous.
A tremendous amount of energy.
There's no comparison. And this causes people to wonder if the future will become more coercive. Oh, well, we really want to save the planet now, and we're going to have a buyback program for all your nasty combustion vehicles, and you're going to have to drive or ride electric in the future. Well, my argument, my hesitation over that proposition is there are 283 million cars and light trucks registered in the U.S., and 3,300,000 of those are electrics, or roughly 1%. So if we look up and find that the average selling price of a new gasoline-powered or diesel car or light truck is $48,000, and we multiply that times the registered fleet at the present time, we come up with a number that is 45% of the national debt. Now, nobody talks about ever paying off the national debt. Not ever. It is so tremendous that it would be political suicide for any politician to utter the words. But we are contemplating a future of all electric vehicles. Now, if we then say, oh, well, what would it cost to replace them with electrics? The electric average selling price is $10,000 higher. So the total fleet replacement cost would be, again, much, much greater. So this makes it unlikely that gasoline and diesel are going to start disappearing from our lives, because it is an immense proposition to switch over the entire human project from one source of energy, fossil fuels, to another, renewables, notably wind and solar, with the political alternative of nuclear. Some people can't utter that word either. On the other hand, some committed environmentalists from the past are 100% behind nuclear power. So, because of course it produces no carbon emissions. Now, if you do a back of the envelope for, say, a 777 flying New York to London, and you say, well, it requires this much thrust to push the airplane along in cruise, that's the force, and it's flying at Mach 0.78, that's the speed, that gives you a horsepower, and the flying time gives you a horsepower hours. Now, this has nothing to do with the efficiency of the jet engine, because all we're talking about is thrust. How much push does it take to move the airplane? If we had an electric airplane running on batteries, we would need that same push if it weighed the same as the turbine-powered aircraft. Well, I found that the battery would weigh 12 times more than the empty weight of the airplane. And then I thought, oh, wait a minute. They're required to carry 45 minutes propulsion reserve over when you arrive. You have to have 45 minutes reserve in case there are traffic problems and you can't land for a while, or there's a weather problem, or someone's holding a demonstration on the runway and you have to divert to another airport. And then I thought, oh, wait a minute. Jet A burning aircraft land much lighter than they take off. In fact, if such an airplane has a problem after taking off, it can't land because its structure is not up to the thump. So it either has to circle and burn fuel, or it has to dump the fuel. So we're going to design a new airplane to carry batteries, and it's going to be quite heavy. For each added 50,000 pounds of weight, we need another main gear wheel with the structure that it entails. The rule with airplanes is it takes a pound of airplane to fly a pound of whatever you want to carry with you, passengers, fuel, etc. Comfy chairs in first class. So we know that batteries have improved steadily since the invention of the lithium ion around 1976, but not by a factor of 10 or 20. And we don't expect them to get a lot better, a lot faster, just because we might like it. So what the airlines are doing, and what international airline regulators are planning, is that net zero carbon synthetic fuels will be produced for those applications that require a high density energy source. And the chemistry for this is all perfectly well understood. We just have to work out the economics. And the idea is to use, well, some people will tell you, it won't be long before we have so much electricity, extra electricity from wind and solar, that we can use the extra to power the generation of synthetic fuels. And then I learned that there's another complication, and that is that, for example, if you're driving an electric vehicle and someone is doing an energy audit on you, they're going to say, oh, and what proportion of the electricity with which you charged your battery came from fossil fuels, and what percentage came from renewables? And in the manufacture of your vehicle, how was carbon involved, and was any carbon dioxide released to the atmosphere? This kind of audit is going to become more and more stringent, so that because government people want to be able to point to progress, and they're going to need figures of merit to be generated that will enable them to do this. So I strongly suspect that they will not just produce enough synthetic liquid fuels for aviation, but also for another field of transportation that uses a very similar amount of fuel annually, namely ocean shipping. Aviation uses about just under 100 billion gallons a year.
Yeah.
My dad told me he had a recurring dream in which he was suddenly faced with the necessity of drinking the entire ocean. And that's what that makes me think of.
Yeah.
So I think that fundamentally, this change from fossil fuels to renewables is going to be a business. It is not going to be determined by politics alone. Someone will not be elected who says, now we're going to whatever. Because if you can't get investors to put money into these various schemes, such as building large numbers of recharging stations or building hydrogen generating apparatus that is commercially viable, it won't happen. Governments aren't going to put the money into these things because they have other uses for it, such as military pensions. And it's not going to be easy, and it isn't going to be fast. So I would suggest that those of you who sit up suddenly at 4 a.m. thinking, there won't be any fuel for my motorcycle, relax, go back to sleep. There'll be something for your motorcycle. Because what's going to happen is it's going to take time. Again, it's investor limited to build all of that extra electric power based on wind and solar. And it's going to take a lot of coordination for some excess, notionally excess electric power to be used for liquid fuel synthesis. Now, won't the liquid fuel put carbon dioxide into the atmosphere? Yes. But the source of the carbon in the fuel and the source of the hydrogen are taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, so it is carbon net zero. They will use direct air capture. You'll see these letters more and more frequently, DAC, to separate carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. It's now 419 parts per million and rising. And they will then employ standard chemistry to make, with hydrogen, liquid hydrocarbons that can be used for any purpose, such as, for example, making paint or synthetic chemicals, of which the world uses an immense amount. So where are we going to get the hydrogen to combine with the carbon to make hydrocarbons? There are three kinds of hydrogen that are discussed now. Green hydrogen is hydrogen that is liberated from water by electrolysis, powered by 100% renewable electricity sources. Blue hydrogen is hydrogen that is sourced from fossil fuels, but produced in such a way that the carbon that is separated from this will be sequestered in deep mines forever and a day. So that carbon is gone. It's out of circulation, no more carbon. That's what would happen, for example, if they said, well, let's make hydrogen from methane. Methane has got a lot of hydrogen in it. they would have those carbon atoms left over. So in a lot of refineries, leftover carbon is burned to generate process heat. But in order to make blue hydrogen, the carbon that results from separating hydrogen from a hydrocarbon has to be permanently disposed of. And then gray hydrogen is the hydrogen that is just like blue, except that the carbon is not sequestered in a deep mine forever and ever. So when people say hydrogen in the future, they're going to say which hydrogen, because only green hydrogen is green and blue hydrogen is a little bit green.
But the combustion, I think the combustion from hydrogen, it's worth noting.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, we should talk about that, because when you combine hydrogen fuel with oxygen from the air, the only product is water. And when the shuttle main engines fire up, well, when they fired up in the past, what you saw, the exhaust, was superheated steam. And so zero pollution from that combustion.
So in that sense, a great fuel in that sense. It's just
a great fuel in that sense.
Gosh, we got hydrogen, but we got to break it off of stuff. We have to use energy to get our pure hydrogen to do what we want to do with it.
Yeah. But now we're going to ask ourselves, why is that Kawasaki Idea bike powered by hydrogen so strange looking? It's strange looking. All those pods and Buck Rogers containers on it, on top and on the sides, have hydrogen tanks in them. NASA engineers used to say hydrogen is huge. If we compress hydrogen to 10,000 psi, 5 times the pressure you find in the welding bottles in the shop, then it takes 6 gallons of volume of that hydrogen to equal the energy in 1 gallon of hydrocarbon fossil fuel. So if your motorcycle has a 4-gallon tank, you're going to have to find room for 24 gallons of hydrogen at 700 atmospheres, 10,000 psi. And the tank is going to weigh something because it has to be, as they say, wicked strong. And you're not going to want the sun heating up the tank, so it's going to be insulated. And you're going to have pressure regulators that step the 10,000 psi down to whatever the gas carburetor on your vehicle uses. All that technology exists. It's just that filling up is going to be a little different from clanking the metal spout of your gas pump into the receptacle on your car. Seals for hydrogen, liquid hydrogen, are Teflon. Okay, let's do liquid hydrogen. Well, the first thing they tell you is liquefying hydrogen requires compression and refrigeration that add up to about a 40% increase in the energy cost of producing this stuff. So that's all right, let's listen to the rest of the story before we decide. Now the ratio drops to 4 gallons of liquid hydrogen to equal the energy in 1 gallon of liquid hydrocarbon. And of course, the reason is hydrogen is super light. It's the lightest of all the elements. So this is going to make our motorcycle look funny. So whether it's a spark ignition engine burning the hydrogen, which is constantly, it's perfectly practical, or whether we run that high purity hydrogen into a fuel cell and drive our vehicle electrically. The hydrogen, we're going to have to find a place for it, and there may not be a place for a passenger, possibly on a little trailer. Or we could put the hydrogen on the trailer for the sake of sociability. But everything seems to want to get in our way when we start considering these alternatives. It used to be that you just had to poke a stick in the ground over in Saudi Arabia, and oil would come out at a production cost of a nickel a barrel. No wonder they were eager to sort of hover over Saudi Arabia immediately after World War II, because once those Schlumberger surveys came in and they looked at it, holy Toledo, this whole place, it could float away. And so it became an immensely, it gained strategic importance. Now, how soon are any of these things going to happen? That's the thing that is always impossible to predict, because along comes some unnamed person and blows up that gas pipeline in Europe. So Germany, the fuel costs in German manufacturing have now just up, up, up. So they are madly offshoring manufacturing to places like Thailand. And German workers are saying, where's my job? And the government is saying, where's my tax money? And so it just becomes impossibly complicated very quickly. And on the one hand, we could say, well, we'll create a world planning bureau. A world? Everyone together agreeing about something? I believe it's been tried.
Yeah, we're getting into sticky territory. It is really.
I want people to realize that this is going to be dense with politics.
Dense with politics, and just even the straight up complication of doing the math and saying like, well, I've got an 86 Toyota pickup truck and it gets 24 miles per gallon and I don't have to make it again. And it makes a little bit more, carbon dioxide, and the hydrocarbons are higher, but what's the cost of, building a vehicle to replace it if it's perfectly okay to keep driving it and maintaining it?
Yeah.
And, we talk about the tons of ore that have to be mined for, new electric vehicles, and where we get in our lithium, and the complexity is immense. I look at one thing that I've always looked at, when the proliferation of ethanol began, I thought, okay, if this fuel is as wonderful as we say, and it's renewable, I mean, there's the faction or the group that says, you're burning food, which is true.
Yep.
The other part of that is I look at what's actually being used, and what's being used to harvest the corn, and they're not burning alcohol, they're burning diesel to do that.
Yep.
And I think electric tractors have the same challenges or let's say similar challenges as putting electrics on motorcycles, just a different.
Especially because during harvest season, those tractors operate 24 hours a day.
It's a very intense period, and there's no, we're going to charge over. Okay, we're done for the day. We're just going to plug them in overnight and go sleep comfortably while our vehicles. There are immense complexities and challenges, and from my perspective as someone, I love electric motorcycles. I love riding them. They have a use case that is not out of the question. You can see manufacturers experimenting with designs like BMW CEO2, which is it's not a scooter and it's not a motorcycle. It's somewhere in between. They call it an e-parkour, which is, we got the design department smoking a little and coming up with fun ideas to put something together. It's a runabout. It's a really neat towny bike. It's really fun. It's super quiet. It's got nice design. It's pretty useful. It doesn't have storage. That's the one thing that you're putting so much battery in, you don't have a place to put your cat. And that's a joke about a scooter that had an immense storage under the seat, and it said a sticker that said no pets.
Yes.
So you don't get to put your cat under the seat of your electric scooter. Harley Davidson's got Mulholland and the lighter electrics that are a little more towny, and that makes a ton of sense. That's a great application. There's swappable batteries in Asian markets. So there's been a consortium of manufacturers who said, we're building scooters. We're all going to use this standard. And there's a big wall of batteries all around the city, just places to get batteries. You take your flat battery out and you stick it in the thing, and that light turns red, and then another one will turn green, and you pull that one out and you put it in. That's the one you get for trading the one in. Can't just take them off the shelf and go home. You got to trade one. And you ride around on that. And that's a great application for electrics. Adoption.
And the cities are where emissions are a major problem.
Yeah.
Not in Iowa.
Yeah.
Although, of course, diesel, you can smell it a long ways off.
Yeah.
Diesel exhaust. So there will have to be a plan. And it's not going to be easy to get people to agree with what it should be. And I suspect that since everyone is dependent upon aviation and upon ocean shipping, that agreement will come more quickly in those areas that are considered essential.
Absolutely.
So we're hoping that there will be synthetic net zero carbon liquid fuels being produced in time. I'm told that it was 0.1% of all aviation fuel in 2022, and that this year is expected to rise to 0.5%. So,
but you can't,
the prospect is there.
Yeah, you can't. I mean, it's really important to say that you can't. We have 100 years of gasoline, basically gasoline.
Doing it the old way.
Gasoline infrastructure, and if you were to remove that from our system and just said there was no gasoline, and we're all driving around in electric cars, and somehow we figured that out instead, and someone came to you and said, no, man, we get this oil, this crude oil out of the ground, and we refine it and we turn it into this incredibly volatile liquid fuel. And what we're going to do with it is we're going to put it in a tank on the vehicle, and you're going to drive around with this really flammable, and then we're going to bury it underground in tanks too. And so we're going to store it underground and it won't leak. Don't worry. If you try to introduce that now, that would be hard to accept for a lot of people.
Sure. Yeah, it would.
And anyway, we have 100 years of infrastructure. It's all there. We can go to the gas station. I would say the adoption was very fast, though. I mean, if you look at 1900 in New York City, San Francisco, Germany, Berlin, whatever, if you look at 1900, it's horses and wagons, and the cubic volume of horse shit everywhere was its own problem, because they were, like the tons of it being shoveled off the street, and where do we put it all? But it was what was happening. It was what was working. But by 1920, horses were a novelty in a city. Like they were, maybe the cops were running around, but it was all internal combustion. It was all vehicles. It had a strong economic prospect. It was more convenient. It solved the poop problem. It did a lot of things that helped us move around. And it's obviously fueled where we are today, and culturally, transportation, commerce, everything that is fundamental. And we've had 100 years of that. And so to say that we can rapidly, suddenly make billions of gallons of synthetic fuel to accomplish that, it just doesn't happen now. And for some period of time, I mean, it's like anything, like solar and wind have made a lot of strides in Europe. They've made a lot of strides with replacing other sources of energy with wind and solar. So there's things happening, but we've had a guy in the comments, maybe more than one, who's like, well, what about liquid fuel? I really like my motorcycle. And, am I going to lose that? How long am I going to be able to ride it? What will I be able to use? And, again, it's impossible to predict, but given how much work it would be to try and suddenly throw the switch, that's probably not how it's going to happen. And we have pay
the $15 trillion to replace all cars and light trucks.
Yeah. And so things will age out, and they did cash for clunkers, and I don't know if that was good or bad, but they've tried it before, and they'll probably try it again. But I'm going to keep my 89 Ford F-250 because it does what I need it to. It's right for the mission.
Yes, indeed. So I think that the transition will take a while, and during that while, we'll have choices. There will be more and more discussion of energy audits, just as in those gradations of hydrogen: green, blue, gray. There will be an energy audit for every pound of steel. These things will, in order to learn where all the energy is coming from and what it's going to and how we can decarbonize. And it's going to take quite a while. It's not going to suddenly, we come home and find out, oh, here's your bill for converting your house to electric heat. And the people will be here to make the conversion Wednesday next week, whether you like it or not. I don't see that happening. I think that we're going to see a process that takes place with, in the words of the Supreme Court, all deliberate speed.
Well, what have we always done? We've learned to manage ever more complicated systems. If you take the car, in the beginning, we used a rag in front of a pipe. And we probably had an atmospheric intake valve, meaning the suction of the piston going down pulled the light pen spring and let some stuff in there, and it went bang, and it was not clean and it was unreliable. And look at the complexity of control that we've laid on a modern automobile, from the gas cap, in between the gas cap and the air filter, and then what comes out the tailpipe. It's incredibly clean. They're pretty darn efficient. Oil changes, like, oh yeah, you got to change your oil every 3,000 miles. Well, that was pretty true and we'll use an 89 Ford F-250. Yep, you probably want to do that. The combustion chamber control, the way that the tolerances, the way that rings work, the management of the gap between the top ring and the top of the piston to not trap hydrocarbons around the side of the combustion chamber, the ensmallening of the bore, a million complex little steps that we've learned and mastered, and that kind of thinking will be, I feel, applied to the system of human life. I mean,
the decarbonizing of human life.
Yeah, using I should
say human culture, because we are to a great extent carbon ourselves.
Yes, indeed. Well, it's impossible to. We haven't solved it, I guess. But we're hoping that this conversation, it certainly has helped me get a broader vision and grip, and I'll keep looking at ways we can save things over here to keep doing things we like over there. And we hope that you have some things to think about, and maybe some items that you haven't thought about before. That's always the goal. Is put this together and do something of value, break through the signal to noise ratio. So that's it for fuels. We appreciate you joining us. This episode, as ever, was brought to you by Octane Lending. If you look down in the video description, there'll be a link to octane.co. It's the prequal flex link. You can go in and you can shop for a vehicle, and you can see what the rate is. You can get motorcycles, you can get a trailer, you get a watercraft, you get a boat eventually. Lots of things. Anyway, they are our parent company. They sponsor us, and you can get a no impact credit check and see what's up. So check it out, and we thank them again for supporting our work here.
Yes, we do.
We do, and we'll catch you next time. There's more than 30 episodes out there, so if you're looking for something else to listen to, check out the backlog. We hope they're relatively timeless and enjoyable on your drive or on your TV. God forbid. My head's in your living room, but hey, thank you for having me there if it is. Take care.